Greetings, youngling. In our previous lesson, we discussed defense with our lightsabers. In this lesson, we will discuss attack as it pertains to Form 1, Shii-Cho. Let's remember how Form 1 came about. According to Jedi texts, there are 7 forms of lightsaber combat. As Jedi initiates, you will concentrate only on one, Form 1, Shii-Cho, which is the oldest of all forms and the first to evolve from the ancient discipline of sword fighting. It is also known as the determination form, or the way of the Sarlacc. It teaches the basic moves of attack and parry, focusing on humanoid bodies' target zones, left side, right side, head, and legs. Form 1 is the foundation upon which the remaining forms build. It's not the best style for blaster deflection or for lightsaber-to-lightsaber dueling, but it is a superior all-around form that you can fall back on in the heat of combat. Thus, you must demonstrate a mastery of this form before you can continue. And so, understanding the origins of Form 1 being used in combat with metal blades, that informs how we use Form 1 for lightsaber combat. It is still basic enough that all Jedi trainees use this as their first form. In Shii-Cho, we use wide, sweeping movements of our saber. We follow through. We commit to our attack with strength. It's useful against multiple opponents. You should not be second-guessing of yourself in this style, but you should choose your attack and follow it through. Attacks should have a sort of wind-up, as would be in traditional broadsword. You're dealing with a heavy sword. If you're going to move it somewhere, you need to give it some impetus. You need to give it some first movement in order to move that heavy sword. And so we will use that same idea as we move our lightsabers. Combatants should be agreed upon about what scoring should be, or how to win a match. What attacks are allowed? Are headshots allowed? That would only be allowed if you were wearing masks. If not, then you mustn't use them without protective helmets. Or would you continue after the loss of a limb? For instance, if you had lost a hand or a leg in combat. That is up to the combatants what the rules should be. We understand that lightsabers will sever any limb that it touches with ease. There are 2 marks of contact that we will discuss. The Shiim, which is attack by the lightsaber's edge, or the Shiak, which is the stab. That's used more in Form 2, so not for this class, but the Shiak is there. The Shiim is what we will be studying mostly, again, as it pertains to a classical Form 1. The important thing to understand is that brutality is not the goal. You must beware the dark side. You must not allow your aggression to give way to rage. There is a difference between rage and intensity. Those are not the same things. Intensity is the earnestness with which you fight with your weapon, but rage is allowing your anger or shame or fear to drive your weapon. A Jedi understands that justice must be served dispassionately. Let us discuss more specifically these marks of contact. An honorable disarming of your opponent is the highest goal of a Jedi. We will discuss the marks of contact. Sun Gem is destroying the weapon, as Dooku did to Anakin Skywalker on Geonosis. Cho Mai is cutting off of the hand, as Vader did to Skywalker on Bespin. Cho Sun is cutting off above the elbow, again as Dooku did to Anakin Skywalker on Geonosis. Cho Mak is cutting off of the leg, if necessary. It is a less honorable attack, but if no other attack will suit in the heat of combat in order to bring the match to an end, then that's what must be done. Now, maiming of the body is more looked down upon as disrespecting the body. Mao Kai is slicing off of multiple limbs, which in our instance we can't do that with our physical weapons. But this was shown as Kenobi versus Vader on Mustafar. Sai-Cha is beheading, which again we won't be using in our form because we will refrain from head attacks. Mace Windu versus Jango Fett displays this on Geonosis with his Vapad form. Sai-Tak is bisecting, as in Kenobi versus Darth Maul on Naboo, or Vader versus Kenobi on the Death Star. So having discussed the marks of contact, let us begin. We will begin with attacks to the shoulders. Again, I'm not using specific numerical references to body zones. I'm simply saying what they are. So to the shoulders. In attacking the shoulders, you want to come at it essentially as an X shape. From the high guard. You may find it perhaps easier from the high guard because you don't have so much wind-up to do. You simply lean into it. Whereas from the lower stance, you have to wind up a little. From the sides, which is the easiest of the cuts, but perhaps more easier to block. From the high guard. From the legs, make a V shape. So it's kind of like the X shape, but it's more of the V shape because you're aiming down. You do have to be careful as you're sweeping down for the legs that you don't expose your back and your head. If you are reaching too far like this, notice how much of my body is available and exposed for a counterattack. So you do need to mind yourself as you are attempting to go for the legs. You could do an alternate sweep. So you can start from below and sweep up that way to try to get their legs. From here, it would be a larger sweep. Let's see these from the side. Those were shoulder cuts. Now these are side cuts. From the high guard. And then going for the legs. Or the sweeps. And from the high guard. Another idea you can use is clearing your space. Perhaps your opponent is advancing too aggressively, or perhaps you have multiple opponents that you are fighting against. You can clear your space with wide sweeps of your blade, as is appropriate in Form 1. And in doing so, you can discourage approaching or possibly multiple enemies. So to do this, simply sweep the blade widely to the side. Or you can use this in sweeping and turning. So with using these wide sweeps, you can clear out your space and give yourself a chance to regroup. You want to be careful of exposing your back to an enemy, but if you're using wide sweeps, it should give you likely an opportunity for them to back off so you can regroup. Now, we're not using headshots in our class, but if you were using it and you had protective gear on and it was allowed and agreed upon, a proper attack to the head in Form 1 would be an overhead hack like this. Or from the high guard. Okay, let's see those from the side. From here. From the high guard. Okay. Again, only to be used if protective gear is in place and if it is agreed upon. You may also ask about the use of thrust. Okay. A thrust is more used in Form 2, and so we're going to avoid this attack unless both combatants have agreed to use it and proper protective gear is in place. The thrust is a use of the Shiak, the stab, okay, where you are attacking them with the tip of your blade rather than with the edge of a blade. Although noticing that the lightsaber has no real edge because it is all deadly. So if one were doing a thrust, it would be simply a stab of sorts to extend out the blade towards your opponent. But again, not something that we are necessarily going to use. But we did learn the parry in the last lesson to combat against strikes where they aren't really a strike in classical Form 1, but it instead comes out as more of a reaching thrust. And so you do need to be aware of what it is and how to defend against it. But really, thrusting is not going to be used in this form, but rather in Form 2, which is a more classical sword fighting form. Now let's also discuss advancing. In the first lesson, I said that moving was very important for defense and attack. This is true, because lightsaber fights don't just stay put in one place. They move, there's mobility. The fights are organic, and they sometimes take you to places you don't expect. So we have to be aware of how to move. Okay, so remembering our steps, advance, or retreat, or sidestepping, or circling. We can use these movements to add to our attacks. So, if you step forward, you can sort of combine a lunge with an attack. So let's try some of these. Let's see those from the side. So by combining your attack and a thrust, you're pushing your opponent back. If you can back them into a corner, then they have no place to escape, and you can control their movements until they are nervous enough to make a mistake that you can score upon. It also helps you to keep measure with an opponent. Perhaps your opponent is backing away too much. Then you need to advance in order to keep in measure with them. A lightsaber is a versatile weapon. In a galaxy far, far away, it can be used at close range or even at long range, depending on your abilities in the Force. However, for our purposes, the lightsabers should stay in our hands. There are some Force users who like to throw their saber and use it as a projectile weapon, guided by the Force. We must understand that this is extremely risky to use in our galaxy. Throwing of the saber is a last resort, not a first one. It's extremely risky. You must understand that full protection is required. For both combatants, you must have a helmet. You should have chest or body armor, perhaps even for your legs, for your arms, certainly for your gloves, because you are throwing a projectile unguided by the Force. As such, it can be difficult or impossible to predict where it will land. You must also understand that your weapon may be damaged or destroyed by throwing your saber. And so you must understand the risks to yourself and to your weapon. And so, your responsibility for this lesson is to demonstrate these attacks that I have shown you. They call these velocities in the galaxy far, far away. It's a sequence of attacks. Perform them from a variety of combos. So for instance, you may do a combo like this. Although again, I just used the head chop. I would advise against using that for Form 1, unless you're using a helmet. Okay, you can also do these at a variety of angles. You can also do them with advances. So perform a variety of these velocities. Practice them so that way you can attack from any angle that you decide, from any point that you've left off. For instance, be able to attack understanding that they may block you. So you can even simulate the idea of blocking, hit, 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 or hit, 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 attacking from various sides to make your opponent, to attack your opponent from various sides, and perhaps they may not be prepared to guard from one angle or another. So practice these velocities in a series of attacks. Perform a variety of combos, and you can combine them with advances as well. That should be all for this lesson. I'm sure you have much practicing to get to. We have one more lesson in which we will discuss counterattacks and feints. Until that time, may the Force be with you.